Hey everyone, this is Steve with another episode of Keep 'em Rollin', and the artifact I want to share with you today from my collection is one of those artifacts that shows you that sometimes the most mundane item has the most interesting story. But before we get to this artifact, we need to do some housekeeping. First of all, I've been alluding in past videos about crossing a Holy Grail item off my bucket list, and it has finally happened. I've been able to obtain the item, and it is paid in full. It is in my possession, and I will be doing an upcoming video about this acquisition. That brings me to the room tour. I've been talking about the room tour for a couple of, well, I want to say a month now, 2 months, and I promised to do one in mid-November. However, silly me, I forgot about a little thing called Veterans Day, or Armistice Day, depending on how you look at it. And every year I do a partnership with our local district library where I loan them things out of my collection to put on display, and then they acquire things from the general public and so forth and so on. And it makes a nice exhibit honoring our veterans for the month of November. Well, I didn't want to shoot the room tour because right now my room has a couple of holes in it from things that I loaned to the district library. So that display comes down at the end of November, so in a couple of weeks, and at that point I will shoot the room tour video, and we'll get to a schedule of videos here. Well, let's do that right now. Schedule of videos coming up. This one should air today. This is Saturday, actually this is Friday. The next video next week will be a military show. I'm going to a small show on next Sunday, in a place called Livonia, Michigan, over near Detroit. It's a small but mighty show, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot the show, show you some of the cool things in the show, and then if I find anything cool, I will share that as well. So next week will be a kind of military show video. Following that is Thanksgiving, and I think at that point I will do the Holy Grail video. Then up next will be a grouping that I just obtained that is stellar. I'm not going to tell you any more. It's really cool, especially for those of you who like the Korean War. And this one, I'm not going to say any more, but you will see that kind of that first week of December, and then I'll be ready for the room tour video the second week of December. So yay, it is coming. I apologize, but there was a good reason why it did not happen. On one final bit of housekeeping, housekeeping. Every time I say that, I think of the Family Guy with the lady who housekeeping. That just makes me laugh. Anyways, on with just a little bit more housekeeping. It still just makes me laugh. For all of you who are new members to the channel, welcome. I appreciate you subscribing. For those of you who have been around for a while, I appreciate you for continuing to watch. This is why I do it, is to share this stuff with you, to hopefully teach you some things, to learn some things from you, because I do watch your videos as well. If you watch and you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. If you like the video, like it, comment on it. If you don't like it, don't like it. And please comment as to why, so I can maybe fix what you don't like. So, on that note, that's the end of the housekeeping. Let's talk about this item right here. This is a simple camera. It's made by Kodak, as you can see here on the front. Now, this camera came to me from a gentleman who I had known for many years. I knew him and his wife. His wife was actually my middle school librarian when I was in middle school, and just loved her dearly and got to know them in adulthood. Wonderful, wonderful couple. And unfortunately, she passed away, and he decided he was going to relocate out to the West, I think it was California, to be with his children. And in cleaning out his house, he came across a bunch of cameras, and he asked me if I had any interest for old cameras, and I said, well, yeah, sure, you know, I mean, because he goes, if you're not interested, I'm just going to throw them away. So I'm like, well, yeah, you know, I can see what I can do with them. So he brought me this kind of big garbage bag full, literally a black garbage bag full of cameras. And he brought it to me and said, here you go. I don't want them. Whatever you want to do with them is fine with me. If you don't want them, throw them away. I don't care. So I began going through the bag, and all of the cameras, literally all of them, were from maybe the 80s, 90s. They were kind of like your Kodak 110s, flip flashes, Instamatics, and so forth and so on. Nothing special, nothing, you know, really unique, just old cameras. So pretty much most of them were going to be relegated to the landfill. However, in the very bottom of the bag, I pulled out this case. I'm like, and I could tell it was heavy, and inside was this little beauty right here. And I thought, oh man, I don't think he realizes this was in here. You know, this is a pretty special camera. So I set this one aside, and the next time I ran into him, fortunately it was before he moved, I said, you know, I think you made a mistake. You know, this camera, you know, there's an old camera that was in the bottom. He goes, oh, you mean the one in the brown case? And I said, yeah, the one in the brown case. And he said, yeah, he goes, I have no use for it. Dispose of it, you know, whatever you want to do with it. And then he said, yeah, that's kind of a unique camera. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, I got that in the Marine Corps. He said in 1945, my corps was sent into China, and we had to accept the surrender of a Japanese battalion that was in China. And on the march, we went through this particular town, and people were out hawking wares, and one person was hawking cameras. And he said, I didn't have a camera. I thought it would be a good time to pick one up because the price was right. So he bought this camera in China on the march to accept the surrender of a Japanese battalion. He said he used it for the rest of his time in the service for the next year or so, and then brought it home, and he said it's kind of sat around ever since. Of course, you can't get film for it, he said, you know, or it's too hard to get film, because I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So, you know, if you want to keep it, you can keep it or throw it away or do what you want. And I thought, wow, I am going to keep it. So I pressed him a little farther because I knew he'd been in the Marine Corps, but he was someone who he didn't like, he'd talk in little spurts, but he didn't like to go into great detail. And if you really pushed him on it, he would shut down. And I didn't want to do that because I respected him. I liked him. This wasn't about, you know, how much information I could get. But what I was able to learn from him was I was able to learn that he went in 1942, and he was part of the 3rd Amphibious Corps. He said he was in the Signal Battalion, but he said he got bumped around, and he got out in 1946. So what I did is I decided to do some research because this was a very short conversation. After that, it was a quick move. He was gone, and then I found out from his family a few years ago that he had passed away, which I felt bad because, once again, I love his kids too. The whole family just was a great family. Well, in my research, I found out the following, because I wanted to try and verify, you know, was there a group that went into China, and what's the whole story behind this? And, oh, I should show you this. This is kind of cool here. I love these. I mean, they're just an engineering marvel, and they're like a piece of art. They're so beautiful. So what I was able to find out is as follows. The 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps was activated on October 1st, 1942 at Camp Elliott in San Diego, California. It was actually known as the 1st Marine Amphibious Corps. It deployed in October of 1942 to New Caledonia, and it was redesignated as the 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps on April 15th, 1944. So he was already a part of it at that time. They participated in the campaigns of Bougainville, Northern Solomons, Guam, Palau, and Okinawa. And he did mention that he was in Guam and Palau and Okinawa. So I can't imagine what type of action he must have seen. I really wish I could have sat down and just given him an extensive interview, but, you know, it just wasn't to be. Now, what's interesting is they took place in something known as Operation Beleaguer. They redeployed on September 1945 to China, and they participated in the occupation of northern China from 1945 until June of 1946. They were deactivated on June 10th, 1946, and he talked about being discharged in the summer of 1946. So it all comes together. So apparently, after fighting through the South Pacific, through the Northern Solomons, Guam, Palau, Okinawa, and the like, Japan, wow, I'm losing my thought here. Japan surrendered, and upon surrendering in August, the 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps was destined to go into Japan during the invasion. The invasion didn't happen, so they were immediately sent into China to repatriate Japanese soldiers back to Japan, to repatriate Koreans to Korea, Vietnamese to Vietnam, and so forth and so on, and kind of get the country sorted out. But they're also there to deal with the kind of growing communist forces that were starting to roam around in China. And I guess they actually had some engagements. I haven't read too in depth about what they did in China, but he was there. And it was while he was in China that he picked up this camera. Now, this just goes to show you, this simple little tool, something that you see on the shelves at most antique shops, but to have that story behind it. And I think this is what gets me so excited about doing this, is to hold something in my hands that was acquired on a street in China by a Marine who was there to help repatriate Japanese soldiers to Japan, accept surrenders from battalions and so forth and so on at the tail end of World War II, and then to fight the communists. This is something he haggled over, picked up, bought, took pictures with, and then brought home. What an amazing, amazing item. And I was so glad I was able to talk to him about it, because had I not, this would just be another kind of plain Jane Eastman Kodak camera. One else I have to wonder, how did this camera make it to China in the first place? If something could only talk. Well, I encourage you to stay tuned, because as stated, there's going to be some awesome videos coming up here over the next 4 or 5 weeks. I'm so excited. Hopefully nothing happens. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. The weather stays good, health stays good, and the like. And please like, dislike, comment. I look forward to interacting with all of you. And once again, this is Steve signing off, reminding all of you out there to keep 'em rolling.